Have you ever noticed that no matter how hard you chase money, it always seems to slip through your fingers? The truth is harsh. It's not a lack of effort, it's an excess of pretense. Carl Jung warned that when life is lived behind a persona, prosperity simply doesn't flow. And do you know why? Because wealth and lies don't go hand in hand. You can fool the world for a while, but the unconscious is never fooled. It exacts the bill with high interest, anxiety, emptiness, draining relationships, and suffocating jobs. What no one has the courage to say is that pretense is the greatest sabotage of prosperity. You work yourself to death, but you don't understand why things stall. And it's simple. The mask drains your vital energy. The ego creates the illusion of security, but the price is losing your own abundance. The irony is that the more you pretend, the more scarcity you attract. Now imagine turning that switch. Imagine discovering that the wealth you seek isn't out there but within, waiting for the moment you have the courage to be whole. This isn't cheap motivational talk, it's a deep law of the soul. Authenticity breeds power. And when this power is activated, money stops being a race and becomes a consequence. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear here may disturb you. It will poke at your nerves, dismantle your beliefs, and shake your ego. But it will also show you why pretense is the greatest thief of prosperity and how reclaiming that lost energy can transform your life. And if you've come across this video, it's no coincidence. Perhaps it's precisely the self's call for you to stop chasing numbers and start living the truth that attracts real abundance. Because in the end, Jung was right. Wealth only comes when you stop pretending. The hidden price of living behind masks. There's a silent cost to hiding behind a mask. Carl Jung called this facade a persona, and while it's useful for social interaction, when it becomes the only face presented, the price is devastating. The person begins to live to please, molding themselves to the gaze of others, believing that only then will they be accepted. The curious thing is that this practice not only robs them of authenticity, but also vitality. It's as if the soul is slowly being suffocated, trading freedom for approval. Have you ever noticed how those who live too adaptably seem tired, even without physical exertion? This exhaustion isn't of the body, but of the spirit. It's a weariness of not being able to be. Deep down, every forced smile, every word spoken to keep up appearances is a piece of their very essence that's lost. And the worst part? The more the mask is worn, the higher the emotional bill that arrives later. The ego in this game becomes an architect of illusion. It creates a convincing character for the audience, but behind the scenes lies a human being who feels, cries, and longs to be seen as they truly are. This internal disconnect creates a dangerous chasm. On one side, the socially acceptable life, and on the other, the inner call that cries out for authenticity. Many report that this chasm manifests itself in bouts of anxiety, depression, and even physical illness. Psychosomatic medicine does not ignore the impact of living in permanent contradiction, and what happens when this burden accumulates? The soul begins to send signals: insomnia, lack of motivation, an inexplicable emptiness. They are silent cries saying, "Enough is enough." And ironically, the more someone tries to hide these signals behind social masks, the more evident it becomes that something is wrong. In spirituality, this hidden price is described as a distancing from the self, the truest core of being. Carl Jung argued that individuation only happens when you recognize and integrate the shadow, not when you run from it. Imagine a tree. If it tried to grow by only showing its branches and hiding its roots, it would fall at the first wind. Likewise, those who live behind masks ignore their roots, their pains, their shadows, their deepest desires. The result is a superficial life, where one works hard but reaps little in terms of real satisfaction. Such people even accumulate material possessions, but feel something is always missing. It's like drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. True prosperity never blossoms in pretense. There are practical examples that illustrate this price well. How often does someone stay in a job they hate just to maintain an image of success? Or do you stay in failed relationships because it's ugly to break up? The social mask demands silent sacrifices, shelved dreams, stifled passions, unexplored talents. A creative person, for example, who stops painting because art doesn't make money, pays a huge emotional price, and this inevitably drains their prosperity. Shadow work, an essential practice proposed by Jung, helps us recognize these sacrifices and confront the lies we tell ourselves. By bringing the shadow to light, we discover that the mask was not protection, but a prison. And the curious thing is that while many believe the mask guarantees acceptance, it actually breeds distrust. Those who play too many roles transmit an artificial energy, and people pick up on this, even if unconsciously. Have you ever noticed how some too proper people seem unreliable? It's because there's no truth in them. Abundance, whether material or spiritual, requires flow, and flow only occurs where there's authenticity. Living masked is like trying to breathe through a straw. You survive, but you don't expand. And when you least expect it, you realize the years have passed and you haven't truly lived. This is the hidden price that few have the courage to face. But there's something even more subtle that few realize. The mask not only tires you out, it also silently drains your prosperity. How the persona silently drains your prosperity. The persona, as Carl Jung described it, is the social mask we wear to adapt to external expectations. It's not entirely bad. After all, we need some level of adaptation to coexist in society. The problem begins when the persona ceases to be a resource and becomes our primary identity. At that point, it stops protecting and starts stealing. Stealing energy, stealing creativity, even stealing money. Does that sound exaggerated? Think about it. How many people spend fortunes to maintain an image that doesn't correspond to who they are? Designer clothes to belong, financed cars to appear successful, courses purchased solely to show off certificates, not to learn. The persona creates an invisible economy that drains resources and never returns true prosperity. In the end, you pay dearly to sustain an illusion. This mechanism functions as a spiritual financial leak. The person believes they are investing in status, but they are only draining their own prosperity. A common example: professionals who accept jobs they hate simply because the role has social prestige. They earn the salary but lose their health, joy, and little by little, their sanity. It's like receiving gold coins in exchange for fragments of their own soul. The ego, the persona's ally, convinces them that this is necessary to be respected. But in practice, this respect never translates into genuine abundance. Instead, it generates resentment and an emptiness that demands compensation, usually consumerism, addictions, or distractions. What seemed to be a gain is deep down just a debt to one's own essence. And all internal debt charges extremely high interest. Spirituality shows that prosperity isn't just about money. It's about the flow of life. And this flow is blocked when vital energy is used to maintain masks. It's like a company that spends more on advertising than on the product. The result may be deceptive for a while, but sooner or later, collapse is inevitable. The persona works the same way. So much is invested in appearing to be that nothing is left to be. This explains why so many externally wealthy people feel miserable internally. And conversely, simple but authentic people seem to radiate abundance. This difference has nothing to do with bank balance, but with alignment with the self. Those who live in accordance with who they are generate natural magnetism. And magnetism, when authentic, attracts opportunities, relationships, and even money organically. Want to see how this manifests itself in everyday life? Think about those business meetings where someone speaks in technical terms, trying to impress, but deep down doesn't convey confidence. That's the persona at work, a lot of noise and little truth. Now compare that to the person who speaks simply but genuinely, conveying clarity and conviction. The latter always generates more impact because they're not draining energy to maintain a mask. This same principle applies to relationships. Those who pretend to be someone they're not spend too much energy acting, leaving little left for life. The consequence is clear. Without vital energy, there's no creativity. Without creativity, there's no prosperity. This is the silent drain. And like any leak, it only stops when you identify the source. Shadow work becomes crucial at this point because it unmasks the drain. By exploring the shadow, one discovers the lies the persona feeds. I need to appear strong. I can't show vulnerability. If I'm myself, I'll lose everything. These narratives imprison and force energy to be spent on pretense. But when these beliefs are illuminated, something extraordinary happens. The energy previously used to sustain the illusion returns to life. It's like turning off a faucet that's been running for years. Prosperity begins to rebuild itself, not from fear, but from authenticity, because true wealth only manifests when you no longer need to put on an act. And it's at this moment that something even deeper emerges. The call of the soul, which no longer accepts any pretense. The call of the soul that no longer accepts pretense. There comes a time when the soul begins to scream. It no longer accepts living on the sly, disguised, or with flimsy justifications. It's that moment when a person looks at their own life and asks themselves, how did I get here? Carl Jung said that when we ignore the self, life pushes us toward crises that force us to listen. And it's in this push that the call arises. You can no longer pretend everything is fine. It could be a sudden illness, an unexpected dismissal, a painful divorce, or even that feeling of emptiness that appears when, theoretically, you've already achieved everything. The soul has a peculiar way of demanding presence. It doesn't accept bargains. It demands truth. And when the call comes, no matter how much the ego tries to resist, the pretense loses strength. This call is often confused with an existential crisis. But it's not a crisis, it's a transition. The soul can no longer tolerate the theater of persona and begins to demand authenticity. This is when spirituality becomes a necessity, not a hobby. People report that meditation suddenly stopped being an option and became a means of survival, or that writing in a journal became a way to organize the mind so as not to go crazy. The ego, in this process, despairs because losing control is its greatest threat. It will try to negotiate, saying, go back to the safe path, keep pretending it's not that bad. But the soul doesn't back down. Once awakened, it presses on until change happens. And this can be uncomfortable because it requires abandoning everything built on illusions. A practical example, how many people abandon stable careers to pursue something meaningful? The soul's calling manifests itself this way. Someone who studied for years to be a lawyer but realizes their passion lies in music. Or that doctor who discovers their calling is writing. From the outside it seems crazy, but from the inside it's liberation. True prosperity isn't born from obedience to what should be, but from alignment with who one is. Jung would call this the process of individuation, ceasing to be a cog in the machine and becoming whole. Of course, the price may be high, criticism, judgment, financial insecurity, but the soul accepts no alternatives. It prefers authentic chaos to false order, and paradoxically, it is in this initial chaos that true abundance begins to germinate. This calling also manifests itself in more subtle ways. Sometimes it's not about giving up everything, but about changing the way you exist in the world. It's that executive who stays in the same position but starts working with purpose, changing the impact they make. Or the mother who, instead of living solely for family expectations, begins to reclaim her own dreams. Small adjustments that seem invisible to others, but internally represent revolutions. The soul doesn't necessarily ask for grand gestures, it asks for consistency. And each time you act in alignment with this calling, vital energy increases, creativity returns, and opportunities begin to arise from where you least expect them. It's as if the universe responds to the simple act of being truthful, but ignoring this call has serious consequences. Those who try to silence their soul end up becoming ill inside. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to age suddenly, as if the weight of years of pretense had fallen off all at once? This isn't just biological, it's spiritual. The soul doesn't accept remaining silent forever, and the longer you ignore it, the more brutal its signals become. This is the fine line that separates those who awaken to authenticity and those who get lost in the maze of the persona. The call, therefore, is not an invitation. It's an ultimatum. And when it arrives, there's no turning back, because right after this point comes the most uncomfortable revelation. The fear of being who you are becomes the greatest invisible sabotage there is. The invisible sabotage created by the fear of being who you are. Fear is a silent architect of prisons. It doesn't need visible bars because it simply creates internal narratives that keep people cowering inside themselves. Carl Jung reminded us that what we don't face becomes destiny, and the fear of being who we are creates precisely this kind of invisible prison. People begin to believe that showing their essence is dangerous, that revealing their true desires will alienate others, that expressing their voice will generate rejection. So, instead of expanding, they contract. They live on constant alert, measuring their words, controlling their gestures, calculating their emotions. And in this obsession with not being rejected, they lose the chance to be accepted for who they truly are. This sabotage doesn't make noise, but it corrodes silently, like rust that only shows up when it's too late. This fear has deep roots. It stems from childhood, when children discover that certain behaviors receive love and others receive punishment. They grow up believing they need to earn affection, and to do so, they create masks. In adulthood, these masks become their persona, efficient at work, overly polite in relationships, always happy with life on social media. But behind this facade lies a human being tired of putting on an act. Shadow work reveals that much of adult suffering stems from this forced adaptation, this constant fear of rejection. And the price? Constant sabotage. The person rejects opportunities, avoids risks, accepts scraps, all to avoid facing their own power. The curious thing is that precisely this repressed power is what opens the doors to true prosperity. There's no shortage of everyday examples. How many people don't start a business for fear of criticism? How many don't write a book because they're afraid no one will read it? How many live mediocre relationships because the fear of being alone seems greater than the courage to start over? This sabotage is invisible because, from the outside, life appears normal. People work, pay bills, even smile at parties. But inside, a voice repeats, "You're betraying yourself." This silent betrayal is worse than any external criticism, because the soul knows when it's being neglected, and this neglect creates symptoms: anxiety, emptiness, a feeling of not belonging. And the more a person tries to stifle this voice, the more it manifests itself in crises. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it escapes. Sabotage also appears in seemingly rational decisions. Someone says, "It's not the time to change careers," but deep down it's fear, disguised as prudence. Another claims they don't have enough talent to take a risk, but in reality, they're afraid of failure. or worse, afraid of success and losing control. The ego becomes an expert at fabricating convincing excuses, and the persona executes them perfectly. Result: life remains stagnant. And while stagnation presents itself as stability, internally the being withers. Prosperity cannot tolerate paralysis. It requires movement, flow, and calculated risk. Those who live sabotaged by fear not only impede their expansion, but also close the doors to synchronicities that could transform their reality. This sabotage is invisible because it doesn't shout, it whispers. It shows up in procrastination, perfectionism, and self-censorship. It's the voice that says, "Don't post that video, they'll judge you. Don't ask for a raise, they'll think you're arrogant. Don't be vulnerable, they'll laugh at you." And each time you obey that voice, your soul shrinks a little further. But there's a curious paradox in all this. The more you pretend to be someone you're not to avoid rejection, the further away you become from the abundance you so desperately seek. It's precisely in this paradox that the key to the next point lies, realizing that the more you pretend, the less life opens up to true prosperity. The paradox: the more you pretend, the less abundance arrives. Here lies one of life's cruelest ironies. Pretense, which many believe to be a survival strategy, becomes a silent poison against prosperity. Carl Jung warned that everything repressed in the unconscious returns in a distorted form. Thus, when someone decides to hide their essence, believing it will protect themselves or gain acceptance, they end up attracting just the opposite. Pretense consumes vital energy, and this energy could be used to create, innovate, love, and prosper. The ego believes it's controlling the game, but reality responds with scarcity. It's like planting plastic flowers and expecting real fruit. The more one acts in the persona stage, the less one reaps in the field of abundance. Pretense closes doors that only authenticity opens. This paradox can be seen in practical, everyday situations. Someone who pretends to like their job just to maintain social status is unlikely to attract better opportunities because their energy vibrates at the frequency of lies. Likewise, someone who pretends to be happy in a relationship just to maintain a perfect appearance ends up pushing away the chance of genuine love. Life seems to punish pretense with stagnation. It's not a punishment, it's a natural consequence. Abundance is flow and pretense is blockage. Imagine trying to drink water from a glass full of cracks. The more you insist, the emptier it becomes. This is how prosperity works in a life of social lies. The effort increases, but the results become increasingly scarce. In spirituality, this paradox translates as a distancing from the self. Those who pretend are always serving the persona, and the persona is never satisfied. It craves more recognition, more applause, more new masks. And while the ego chases these external rewards, the soul cries out for coherence. This internal conflict generates a state of permanent lack, an emptiness that neither money nor status can fill. This is why so many reach positions of power yet feel a hole within themselves. Pretending is like trying to fill this hole with smoke. It seems to work, but nothing changes. Abundance, on the contrary, arises when inner and outer life are aligned, when the shadow is integrated and not repressed, when the being is whole and not divided. A practical example is the entrepreneur who creates a business solely to make money, but without connecting with their essence. They may even make money, but growth stalls at some point because they lack truth in what they do. Compare this to someone who starts a business based on something they deeply love. This second person attracts clients, partners, and opportunities almost magically because they don't need to waste energy pretending. Their work exudes authenticity, and this authenticity is magnetic. Carl Jung would say that in this case, synchronicity begins to operate. The right people, unexpected encounters, doors that open effortlessly. This is the paradox in action. Those who pretend lose, those who are genuine attract. Not because the universe rewards, but because energy isn't wasted on illusions. This paradox also manifests itself in the body. People who live pretending often report chronic fatigue, unexplained pain, and constant insomnia. It's as if the body screams the truth that the mouth dares not speak. Pretense requires continuous effort, and continuous effort without authenticity drains the bones. Burnout, deep down, is a sign that life is being lived out of alignment. Have you ever noticed that when you do something you love, you can go hours without feeling tired? This is abundance in action. But when you pretend, even simple tasks seem unbearable. The paradox is clear. Pretending is hard work and drains energy. Being authentic gives energy and opens doors. And it is precisely at this crossroads that the next point arises, the shadow which so many fear, but which holds the secret key to true wealth. The shadow as the key to unlocking real wealth. When Jung spoke of the shadow, he didn't treat it as an enemy, but as the guardian of forgotten treasures. Most people, however, spend their lives avoiding facing this dark side, believing that only what is beautiful and acceptable can generate prosperity. But that's precisely where the secret lies. True wealth hides in what you reject in yourself. Repressed anger, for example, can be transformed into energy for action and courage. Envy, when recognized, can reveal genuine desires you need to pursue. Even fear, when illuminated, becomes a compass pointing to where your expansion lies. Ignoring the shadow is like leaving gold buried in the backyard while begging on the street. It's paradoxical, but only by delving into what you fear can you open space for true abundance. Shadow work isn't a therapeutic whim, it's a tool for spiritual survival. Imagine someone who spends their life trying to be too nice, suppressing their assertiveness to avoid conflict. This pattern may seem virtuous, but deep down it blocks prosperity. Why? Because without the courage to say no, this person lives being exploited in jobs, relationships, and even friendships. The result is resentment, frustration, and a life of emotional and financial scarcity. When they finally look at their shadow and acknowledge the anger they've denied for years, they learn to transform it into healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries are like gates. They protect the inner garden, allowing relationships, projects, and even money to flourish. The shadow, when integrated, doesn't destroy. It protects and multiplies. Practical examples demonstrate this clearly. The entrepreneur, who recognizes their ambition, rather than hiding it, can use it to create thriving and impactful businesses. The artist who embraces their melancholy can transform it into works that touch the masses. The mother who acknowledges her exhaustion learns to ask for help, creating space to reconnect with herself and her family in a healthier way. Everything that is rejected becomes sabotage. Everything that is integrated becomes a resource. This is why Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." True prosperity lies not in denying the shadow side, but in leveraging it. Like coal that, under pressure, transforms into a diamond, the shadow carries the riches that the ego insists on hiding. Spirituality confirms this dynamic. In many traditions, the descent into the inner hell is an essential part of the ascension process. Jesus in the desert, Buddha confronting Mara, shamans undergoing symbolic death rituals, all face the shadow before achieving enlightenment. This is not just metaphor, it is a universal archetype. Human beings only awaken to their wholeness when they stop dividing themselves into acceptable and unacceptable. Abundance comes from the whole, not from the fragmented. Therefore, when someone embraces their vulnerability and exposes it truthfully, they create an immediate connection. This connection in business or relationships is what generates real prosperity. Because people don't trust perfect masks. They trust those who have the courage to show their scars. But this is precisely where many get stuck. The ego fears losing control, and the persona fears losing reputation. So they create excuses to avoid looking within. I don't have time. It's not important. The past is in the past. But the shadow doesn't disappear through neglect. It only grows stronger. And the more you run away, the more it manifests itself in failures, repetitions, and destructive patterns. Have you ever noticed how some people always attract the same type of abusive relationship? Or how they repeat financial crises, even after changing jobs or cities? This is the shadow demanding attention. When this inner material is finally faced, the doors to prosperity begin to open. And it is at this point that we understand why Jung asserted that authenticity is the true source of power. Why Jung saw authenticity as a source of power. Carl Jung saw authenticity not as a luxury, but as a vital force. He knew that those who live according to their truth carry a magnetic energy that cannot be faked. While the persona requires constant effort to maintain an image, authenticity doesn't require performance. It simply exists. And it is in this full existence that power is born. Authentic people don't need to shout to be heard, nor chase opportunities. They attract. Have you ever noticed how someone who speaks truthfully, even silently, captures everyone's attention? This isn't manufactured charisma. It's coherence between who one is inside and out. This coherence creates a kind of invisible aura that generates trust. And trust is the most valuable currency in the world. Authenticity is power because it eliminates internal division. The ego, when trying to please, divides energy between who I am and who I need to appear. Authenticity, on the other hand, unifies, releasing creative power that was previously trapped in maintaining masks. It's like driving a car with the handbrake on. You might move, but you tire quickly and don't get far. When a person allows themselves to be whole, it's like releasing the brake. Flow happens naturally. This power is seen in spiritual leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs who impact multitudes. It's not the resume or the bank account, but the feeling that they are real. Jung would say, the self is present. And where the self is, there is power that cannot be bought, only recognized. A practical example, think of great communicators. Steve Jobs wasn't the most likable, but his authenticity about his beliefs transformed the technology industry. Frida Kahlo didn't hide her pain, and it was precisely this authenticity that made her art eternal. On the spiritual side, think of ordinary people who have no followers or platform, but who, by being genuine, become reference points in their communities. This strength comes not from technical skills, but from the absence of pretense. Authenticity cuts through layers of resistance because human beings, in any culture, recognize truth instinctively. And when someone is genuine, it opens space for connections that generate emotional, relational, and even material wealth. After all, no one invests in someone who doesn't inspire trust. Authenticity is also freedom. When you're authentic, you don't need to waste energy on false narratives. You don't need to remember the lie you told yesterday, nor balance different personas for different contexts. This relief frees up energy for creation, innovation, and expansion. That's why Jung associated authenticity with power. It returns the energy that was being wasted on pretense. Spirituality reinforces this by saying that the vibration of truth attracts compatible experiences. Those who live masked attract masks. Those who live truthfully attract abundance, and in this process, even money begins to behave differently. It stops being something you desperately chase after and becomes a natural consequence of who you are and what you offer. But here's where a crucial point emerges. When authenticity is restored, money loses its role as a central goal and becomes a result. It's at this moment that prosperity stops being an exhausting race and becomes an inevitable consequence. The focus shifts from having to being. And when being is true, the universe responds accordingly. This shift is revolutionary because it breaks the logic of scarcity that the ego feeds. And it opens the door to the next understanding, the precise moment when money becomes a consequence and no longer an objective. The moment when money becomes a consequence and not an objective. There comes a moment in the awakening journey when money ceases to be an obsession and becomes a reflex. This moment doesn't happen when you reach a certain number in your bank account, but when you break with the ego's logic that reduces prosperity to figures. Carl Jung showed that when the self takes center stage in life, everything else reorganizes around it. At this point, money is no longer pursued as a goal, but appears naturally as a consequence of the coherence between essence and action. The curious thing is that the more one anxiously pursues it, the more distant it seems. But when energy is directed toward expressing who you truly are, whether in business, art, or a relationship, financial flow begins to happen almost spontaneously. In practice, this can be seen in concrete examples. Think of a professional who chooses a career simply because it makes money. They may even thrive for a while, but sooner or later they burn out because they're serving their persona and not their self. Now compare that to someone who connects with an authentic purpose, a doctor who truly loves healing, a teacher who thrives on teaching, an artist who expresses themselves without asking permission. These people seem to radiate magnetism, and money comes to them in recognition of the value they deliver. Spirituality explains this as the law of flow. What you truly give returns in abundance. Money then ceases to be an ultimate goal and becomes just one of the ways the universe rewards authenticity. The paradox here is fascinating. When money is an objective, it behaves like a shadow. It slips away, it flees, it's never enough. When it's a consequence, it multiplies. This happens because the focus shifts from how to earn more to how to serve better from who I am. And serving doesn't mean submission, but genuine expression. Jung said that when we follow the soul's deepest calling, it sustains us. This means there's a kind of invisible contract between the self and life. If you dare to be who you are, life guarantees the resources to sustain that boldness. And these resources include money. Therefore, when money becomes a consequence, you discover that prosperity wasn't outside, but was always waiting for authenticity. A simple example is content creators. Many start producing videos just to monetize and soon give up because they don't get engagement. But those who speak truthfully, who share real experiences, naturally attract a loyal audience. Monetization appears as an effect, not a central goal. The same goes for entrepreneurs. Those who create solely to profit live off tiring launches and ups and downs. Those who start their own businesses based on something they love generate sustainable businesses because they don't need to waste energy pretending. Money comes as a consequence of genuine dedication, and this dynamic is universal. Whether you sell bread, offer spiritual counseling, or paint pictures, if you are authentic, prosperity manifests. And it's at this point that a subtle but powerful shift emerges: your relationship with time. When money ceases to be an objective, anxiety diminishes because you no longer live in the logic of lack. A state of trust emerges, in which each step seems aligned with something greater. And it's in this state that things begin to happen, that the ego calls coincidence, but Jung called synchronicity. The right people appear, unusual opportunities present themselves, paths that seemed closed open up. Money begins to flow along with these meaningful connections, as if it were just one piece within a larger puzzle. And this is precisely what brings us to the next point: the synchronicities. that only happen when you live your truth. The synchronicities that only happen when you live your truth. Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidences that can't be explained by chance alone. They're those moments when life seems to respond directly to your authenticity. When you're aligned with yourself, events begin to fall into place almost magically. You think of someone and they call. You're searching for a new path, and the exact book or course you need comes along. You decide to change careers, and suddenly someone presents you with the right opportunity. These experiences aren't luck, but a reflection of inner alignment. The persona doesn't generate synchronicity because it lives a lie, but authenticity creates invisible bridges to reality. It's as if the universe says, now that you're real, I can conspire on your behalf. Real-life examples illustrate this phenomenon. How many people report that after finally leaving a job they hated, unexpected offers came their way? Or people who, after leaving failed relationships, found someone who seemed tailor-made for their path? This doesn't happen because life rewards suffering, but because the energy previously spent on pretense is released, and with it, a magnetic field emerges. It is in this field that synchronicities flourish. Spirituality calls this the law of attraction, but Jung went further. He said that the collective unconscious responds when the individual aligns with their truth. It's not about wanting more, it's about being true. When you are, the external world responds on the same frequency. These synchronicities aren't limited to major events. They appear in the details. You open a random book and find exactly the phrase you needed to hear. You watch a video without intending to, and it answers a question you've had for weeks. You meet someone at the supermarket who shares an experience that can change your perspective. When you live masked, these opportunities go unnoticed because your mind is too busy pretending. But when you're present in your own truth, every detail takes on meaning. It's as if the universe speaks a secret language, and this language can only be understood by those willing to listen without masks. These synchronicities also have a practical effect on prosperity. Authentic people attract contacts who become partners, clients who become friends, opportunities that multiply. This happens because, by living your truth, you become trustworthy. Pretense repels, but authenticity builds bridges. It's like networking. You can collect business cards without ever building trust, or you can simply be genuine and attract connections that turn into lasting alliances. And these alliances are often the foundation of true wealth. Jung didn't speak of wealth simply as money, but as wholeness. Synchronicity is a reminder that when you are whole, life takes care of aligning the resources to sustain that wholeness. But there's a detail few realize. Synchronicity isn't a reward, it's a consequence. It doesn't happen because you deserve it, but because you're finally in flow with what is. And it's in this flow that wealth and essence stop moving in opposite directions and begin to intertwine. Life stops being a race to conquer and becomes a process of receiving what was already available, but you couldn't see. And when this happens, a powerful realization emerges. True prosperity isn't choosing between being rich or being true, but living in a state where wealth and essence walk hand in hand. The awakening to a life where wealth and essence walk together. True awakening happens when you realize there's no separation between living your essence and manifesting prosperity. For a long time, the ego convinced you that you had to choose. Either you were true to yourself or you earned money. This belief divided entire lives, but Jung already showed that this division is an illusion of the persona. The soul doesn't understand dichotomies, it only understands wholeness. When you embrace who you truly are, you're not giving up anything. You're making room for everything. Wealth and essence aren't rivals, they're allies. It's like breathing. You don't have to choose between inhaling and exhaling. True abundance arises when you allow yourself to live in this natural flow, without masks and without unnecessary compromises. In this state, work ceases to be a burden and becomes an expression. Money ceases to be a pursuit and becomes recognition. Relationships cease to be survival contracts and become soul-searching encounters. This change isn't theoretical, it manifests itself in practice. You feel more energy, create more fluidly, and connect with people who vibrate on the same frequency. It's as if life stops being a battlefield and becomes a fertile field. Jung would say this is the sign that the self has taken center stage. The persona doesn't disappear, but it loses control. The ego doesn't vanish, but it ceases to be a tyrant. And the shadow, it becomes a partner, reminding you that even in darkness there are seeds of gold. Examples of this are visible in every field. The artist who transforms his pain into a masterpiece, touching multitudes. The entrepreneur who creates businesses rooted in purpose and thrives without needing masks. The teacher who inspires generations, not because he follows rules, but because he transmits passion. The curious thing is that when wealth and essence go hand in hand, success seems inevitable. Not because everything becomes easy, but because energy is no longer wasted on pretense. Each step is sustained by consistency, and consistency creates confidence. This confidence, in turn, opens doors that previously seemed inaccessible. Thus, prosperity ceases to be something to be achieved and becomes something to be lived. And this living is, ultimately, the greatest expression of spirituality. Awakening to this integration also redefines what it means to be rich. It's not just about accumulating money, but about feeling whole. One person can have millions and feel devoid of meaning. Another can have much less and radiate fulfillment because they live in alignment with their essence. This contrast makes it clear that prosperity isn't a number, it's a state. When wealth and essence go hand in hand, you experience something rare, abundance that doesn't need to be defended. It's solid because it doesn't depend solely on external circumstances, but on who you are inside. And no one can steal what is an authentic expression of your soul. It's a kind of power that can't be bought, only recognized and lived. But this awakening isn't a fixed destination, it's an ongoing process. Living authentically requires daily vigilance, because the ego always tries to regain control. The persona, from time to time, whispers again that it's better to fake a little to be accepted. But those who have tasted wholeness can no longer turn back, because they've realized that the greatest wealth is not just having, but being. And in that being, everything else flows. It's at this point that the journey gains a new horizon, not just living without pretense, but discovering each day how to deepen this state in all aspects of life. And it's precisely there that the story connects with the next step. Understanding how this knowledge can be presented from the beginning, with an introduction capable of touching the pain and opening the vision of those ready to listen. Now you know, pretending is expensive. The persona may even give the illusion of acceptance, but the price is the loss of energy, authenticity, and prosperity. Carl Jung taught us that life exacts its toll on every lie we tell ourselves, and that abundance only emerges when the self takes over. The question is, how long will you hide behind masks? What will you choose from now on? Continue playing roles that drain your soul, or begin to experience the brutal power of being true? Are you willing to face your shadow, break free from invisible sabotage, and allow wealth and essence to walk hand in hand? Because if not now, when? Think about it. How many opportunities have you passed up because you were too busy pretending? How many relationships could have been deeper if you had shown who you really are? How many talents have you kept hidden for fear of rejection? Life won't wait for you to be ready. It's calling you now. The choice is simple, but not easy. Either you continue feeding your ego and keep chasing prosperity that never arrives, or you decide to stop pretending and let authenticity open doors that have always been closed. If this content resonated with you, apply what you learned. Try small acts of truth in your daily life and see how the world begins to respond. And if you want to continue this journey, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and dive in with me in each new chapter. Because the next step of your transformation begins when you choose not just to hear, but to live this truth.